protection and 100% sustainable management. My name is Dr. Angus Friday, and I'll be your moderator for this session. We have a number of speakers with us who I will introduce before they join the call. But first, however, I just wanted to say a few words on this important topic, and then we'll be making introductions. First of all, let's look at where we are. We are now over a year into the United Nations decade for ocean science and for sustainable development. And the important role the ocean plays in climate, livelihoods, commerce, and much more is demanding global recognition. More than 100 nations have called for the protection of at least 30% of the marine environment by 2030. Marine protection is an effective way to preserve, maintain, and restore biodiversity and recover biomass in the marine environment. Marine protection also helps to combat climate change by increasing carbon capture. MPAs are an important, and by MPAs we mean marine protected areas, are an important aspect of the broader blue framework and economic model to achieve 100% sustainable management. This represents an important shift away from unsustainable extractive economies and towards resilient, nature-based economies that support people and the planet. These nature-based economies, in turn, can support value-added economies as well as service and knowledge-based economies. It is in this context of 100% sustainable management and 30% protection that we need sustainable finance now more than ever. This will ensure successful implementation, adaptive management, and durability of these systems. Finance for sustainable ocean management is a pressing issue with a global need for coordination, innovation, and strategic approaches. Major challenges persist, especially in guaranteeing funding for effective implementation, including the monies needed for monitoring, control, and surveillance. We need these for thriving MPs, not only to meet the conservation objectives, but also for greater levels of natural capital. That natural capital in turn underpins the blue economy. Let's recall that 70% of the ocean economy relies on a healthy ocean. Given the importance of sustainable finance, this is very much the focus for today's discussion. So what does this mean for small island states, and what does this mean for the Pacific? For starters, more than a third of the world's ocean is contained within the territorial seas and EEZs of small island developing states. If the global target of at least 30% marine protection is to be reached in a meaningful and representative way, it will require SIDS and other large ocean states to undertake large-scale and comprehensive marine protection within their national waters. Almost 98% of the Pacific region is ocean, and altogether, the Pacific Island nations control some 12 million square miles of the Pacific Ocean. It's an area equivalent to about 15% of the globe's surface. As a result, the ocean and its resources are central to the lives and future prosperity of the Pacific Islands. And the same could be said for the rest of the world. Pacific Island culture and heritage are steeped in the ocean. They have long been devoted stewards with outstanding engagement and cooperation across all levels. Despite this, the global stressors on the region are straining their marine systems. So much of the world depends on the resources of the Pacific, and there is a cost to managing those resources. That cost should not only fall on Pacific countries, but indeed for all of those countries who benefit from those resources. It's not only necessary for island leaders to take action to sustainably manage their oceans, but it's incumbent upon the world to provide commensurate support to safeguard these resources for the benefit of all. A variety of tools are available to sustainably finance MPA implementation. These include traditional approaches such as fees, fines, and taxes, as well as newer strategies such as trust funds, debt for nature swaps, and carbon markets and blue bonds. Some of these tools are well suited for coastal MPAs, areas where we see significant human activity, whereas others more relevant for offshore MPAs that exist far from the reach of most human activities and industry. Even with these, and especially for developing nations, there is a need for new ocean financing mechanisms and technical assistance. This needs to be supported by developing nations, developed nations, distant water fishing nations, and international development institutions. These solutions should be embedded in legal frameworks and commitments, including the High Seas Treaty, the Convention on Biological Diversity, post-2020 framework agreements. In this session, our dynamic panelists will discuss the tools available to achieve sustainable finance and build enabling environments for effective MPA implementation. They will also explore new and bold ideas for durable and significant finance. Panelists will discuss the legal and institutional frameworks needed to ensure that revenues generated from these sources are utilized for the intended purposes of sustainable financing of MPA implementation. Our first speakers are Rona Barr and Noah Greenberg. Rona is an environmental economist whose work focuses on the role of economic instruments in marine conservation and sustainable development, and also in designing programs that translate to real benefits for stakeholders and the environment. Her analyses have covered a wide range of topics, including value chain economics, sustainable financing for marine protected areas, and infrastructure development. Noah Greenberg is the director of Starling Resources, a Bali-based sustainability consulting and advisory practice. Starling Resources engages with stakeholders across sectors to understand issues, develop consensus around workable solutions that fairly distribute costs and benefits, and implement groundwork to support those solutions. We also have others joining, and I'll say a little bit about them just before they speak. We have Mr. Kami, who's an innovator and experienced consultant with a demonstrated history of working in green development and growth, natural resources management, internet for development, and strategic planning for organizations and governments. I'll say a little bit more later on about William Cosca, who's also joining us, and Coral Pasisi. So first, if we may, we'd like to hand over to the next speaker to give us a little bit of an introduction and say some overall remarks. So in that regard, Tahalo.
Hello, are you there? I believe Mr. Tahalo,
okay.
Maybe.
Well, perhaps we can go to Rona and Noah. Rona and Noah, you have the floor.
Awesome, thank you. A pleasure to virtually meet everyone. There's a few colleagues on here that I haven't seen in a while, so it's great to see some faces again. And yeah, great to do this presentation to what I can see as a diverse group of people from all over the world. So wow, okay. Myself and Noah, this is our presentation for the Oceans conference that happened in June. So let me just pull up my slideshow and then confirm that you're not seeing the wrong slides. So here we go. Share screen. Okay. My computer takes a little bit of time to, can you see that?
Would you mind putting it into full screen mode?
Okay, it just takes a little bit of time to connect my screen for some reason. How does that look? You seeing the full slides and not presenter mode?
Yeah, all perfect.
We can, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to jump right in because I know we are tight with time. So this is a presentation about a paper that we wrote recently, commissioned by the Bloomberg Philanthropies and Oceans 5. And with collaboration with the Waitt Institute. And it was really a task. We had about 6 weeks to do this paper. And it was a lot of iterations. We went back and forth through experts. And I think Noah and I really sort of changed the way we thought about this paper as we were writing it, which was great, but also a struggle at the time. So I really hope that it resonates with people. So I'll give you just a little bit of an introduction to the paper itself. And really what we kind of moved away from the normal thinking about marine protected area finance as standalone sites that require their own individual funding, to think more about MPAs as public goods, that they shouldn't really have to finance themselves, and that their costs themselves really are taken out of context a lot of times. And I think that's one of the main things that we draw on. And then that we really sort of pulled in all of these new innovative ways to finance this, which isn't really just about tourism, it's about a lot more sectors. So I'll just go quickly into the table of contents. So we briefly discussed the ocean economy and MPAs, and then Noah's going to take over from there and talk about understanding MPA costs in context, a little bit about really pulling in these new finance streams, and then a short discussion on pathways forward. So to sort of resonate what Angus was saying, the ocean economy is the 7th largest economy globally after the United. So if we look at it against many countries, whereas the US is the first, the ocean comes in 7th after the UK, although probably not the UK anymore, but this was done in 2016. So it has an asset value of about 24 trillion and an annual contribution to GDP of about $2.5 trillion a year. And we often look at a few basic economies when we talk about the ocean and marine protected areas, and those are really fisheries, tourism, and shoreline protection. And the losses for those are also very, very large. We're talking about 21 billion under a business as usual scenario over the next few years annually in losses. Tourism, we're talking about 31 billion. Actually, I don't think that's annually. And climate change mitigation comes in around 260 billion. And that's through, I think that was a WWF study, which we have references for. But what we don't talk about are those other sectors that rely on an intact ecosystem or an ocean ecosystem. So for example, because they're not using the coral reefs, we sort of ignore them, right? So we're talking about shipping, we're talking about telecommunications. And for example, the shipping industry, due to increased storm activity under the climate change scenario, is losing, just to reroute one boat can cost $75,000 a day. So, port adaptation costs are in excess of $30 million per kilometer. So these industries really do rely on an intact, healthy ecosystem and an ocean ecosystem. And so this slide, I'm sure you've all seen many, many times. It's really about the provisioning services of the ocean and of the marine protected areas. And as conservationists, we're always being asked to value these things. But I think what we've come to sort of think about with this paper is that we should stop trying to value them and really just accept that they have an innate value to the ocean, and then really sort of move on from that, really. And so with marine protected areas, there is an obvious value that they have to a wider seascape, to the ocean economy. 170 countries have already acknowledged this. They've committed to 30 by 30, so 30% by 2030. And there is limited research on how much this is actually going to cost. The literature says between $5 to $19 billion annually, which may seem by a lot, but I think NOAA will put those costs into really good context in the later slides. And that's also from a study done in 2004, which it's a good benchmark, but I think there's a lot that we need to do. And that's something else that we've really discovered from this, working on this paper, is that there's a lot we really need to do to sort of work out what the immediate and realistic costs of doing 30 by 30 are actually going to be. So where are we at the moment? We're currently at about 7% of ocean protection. Of that, 3% is what we would call fully protected. What does our spending look like on MPAs? We don't have good data globally on how much is spent on marine conservation. But what we do know is that it's similar to biodiversity spending overall, which in 2019 equated to about 1.4 to 1% of global GDP. I mean, tiny, particularly when we look at what the global value of the oceans is. So that's about $52 to $143 billion. The key sources is the MPA spending is dominated by government allocations, followed, so that's about 60%, and that's followed not closely, but it's followed by ODA, philanthropy, and then for site-specific, we have visitor fees. And then obviously there are a huge amount of challenges for MPA finance, which we're going to touch upon a little bit more in the later slides, but really just to highlight what some of the key ones are as MPAs as a public good. So they provide all these values, but they are very hard to monetize. Current MPA finance is fragmented and is nowhere close to meeting the value that we need for current MPAs, let alone 30 by 30. Things that we haven't touched upon but Noah will go into a little bit more, I think, is like the geographical challenges. So as Angus was saying, a lot of the beneficiaries to marine protection are the wealthier countries and also the sectors, a lot of industry, which has its money not in those countries that are providing the benefits. So how do we redistribute that equitably? And also, one of the real things is that these MPA costs are often talked about in isolation. How much is this MPA going to cost? But what we don't talk about is how much does seascape management cost in general as a baseline. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Noah, who will take it from there.
Thank you, Rona. And thanks quickly to the folks at the Virtual Island Summit and to UNEP and Oceans 5, and of course, to everyone in attendance. It's a great list of folks in attendance. We're happy to see everyone, and it's great to have this opportunity to talk about and share our work a little bit. As Rona mentions, I'm going to talk a little bit more about financing. As you've heard, right, rough estimates, thank you, Rona, are in the range of 5 to 19 billion. And we could talk for a long time about, what's in those estimates and what's not. But as Rona mentioned, it's kind of a benchmark, and we just want to use that now for a conversation. And interesting, perhaps more interesting than what's specifically in those costs, is how do we think about those costs? As Rona mentions, these are often talked about in the abstract, which puts them at something of a disadvantage. We talk about 12 billion is that additional dollars on top of what is being spent. We need to find that money. When we think about the seascape, the entire seascape should be managed. There should be no part of the seascape that is unmanaged or ungoverned, right? So in effect, of course, many MPAs are developed in areas that are unmanaged and ungoverned. And so the MPA becomes sort of the tip of the spear in terms of marine governance. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be management there already. So a more appropriate way to think about the costs of MPAs is to look at them in comparison to a baseline system of management. What is the delta or the difference between MPA implementation and a baseline fisheries, spatial, surveillance management of marine territory. We also want to think about the role of cost sharing and in-kind services, which is critical. When we think about, in particular, a large-scale MPA scenario where surveillance and patrol pose unique challenges, and MPA managers will often lack the resources, the financial resources, the technical resources, equipment, often the legal mandate or capacity to effectively patrol large-scale MPAs. This role is more effectively taken on by other agencies, marine patrol agencies, marine police, military, fisheries enforcement agencies, or other civilian or military agencies. These agencies have the mandate already, or perhaps should have the budget, the equipment, and the personnel to implement such activities. We can talk about this in relation to other activities such as scientific research and monitoring, outreach and education. There is a network of institutions out there whose natural role can be, can accommodate marine protected areas. So in other words, when we look at MPAs in the abstract, we miss this broader context in which multiple institutions across sectors are brought together to play a critical role. Moving on to this slide here, MPAs in context. So even when we do look at them in the abstract, as we are here, this 10.7 billion, we see that it's actually really quite small in comparison to the industries it supports, and even compared to fisheries subsidies, which are more than double the estimated cost using these estimates of reaching a 30% coverage. So imagine for a second that we could reallocate half of fisheries subsidies to conservation, decreasing pressure on fisheries while also fully funding 30% MPA coverage. So again, using kind of back of the envelope kind of approaches and calculations, we just wanted to look at how we could meet a 30% coverage target. As we mentioned, allocating half of fisheries subsidies would get you there. Another way to do it would be to look across the various financing sources, domestic government budget allocations. As we've discussed, MPAs are a critical and integrated part of seascape management. Climate finance, overseas development assistance, and then the variety of sectors that benefit from a healthy ocean. And so if you look across these, and you can look at it, it's a relatively reasonable reallocation of funds from each of these sources that gets you to where you need to be. So the impacts of this reallocation would be minimal, or at worst manageable on these different economic sectors. Next slide, please, Rona. And here we just have the comparison between, again, a very rough estimate of the cost of meeting 30% by 30 and the different sectors. So, again, with relatively minimal or at least manageable impact, we can meet these cost estimates. So we recognize that MPAs are public good and that examining MPA costs in isolation puts them at something of a disadvantage. MPAs are a critical and integral part of seascape management. But we never talk about the costs of managing fisheries or offshore extraction in the same way as we talk about MPA finance, right? Fisheries management, offshore, management of offshore extraction and other activities, those are always assumed to be part of government budgets. And yet somehow MPAs have been removed from that conversation. We understand why that's happened because we have a challenge that we're trying to meet. But nonetheless, you can see how that takes it, out of its role, a critical role in offsetting the impacts of these various economic sectors on the ocean. There are numerous financing mechanisms and all of them can be critical. And I just mentioned a few of them on the right here on this slide. There are many more. However, it is important to recognize, we think, that some of these are really site-based opportunities, site-based revenue or offsetting opportunities. And we need to recognize, I think, the limitations of site-based financing options, right? And so, not all MPAs can be or should be even, I would argue, self-financing. Localized revenue generation and the quantification or monetization of local MPA benefits we think will inevitably fall short of fully recognizing the holistic value of MPAs and MPA networks. So again, not to discount the site-based opportunities, tourism, all of these mechanisms can be critical. But again, it is limiting, we think. And so the question then is for, MPAs exist to offset a hugely valuable ocean economy. The key challenge then is not finding the funding. I think we've hopefully shown that there is plenty of funding there. The key challenge is how to channel that funding or reallocate that funding from the users and beneficiaries to conservation management. So I'm just going to close quickly. And we've spoken about a lot of these already. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. But just to summarize a little bit, there remains, of course, a number of challenges outside of the ones we've discussed. Technical and management capacity. We believe that perhaps for every dollar spent directly on conservation, perhaps $0.50 should be spent on capacity development. And that's not really discussed much in the financing literature. So there are huge challenges out there. Also, the inclusion of local communities and underrepresented groups, right? This is another significant, I think, easily solvable, but it remains a significant challenge. We also, of course, don't deny that we need to know more about the costs of MPA management and how the benefits and costs are distributed. As Rona mentioned, right, it is the small island developing states and less developed countries that are going to bear the burden of these costs, and the communities within those countries in particular. So we definitely need to know more about that. But again, we shouldn't let this prevent progress on generating and allocating the finance for MPAs. The money is there. We recognize the importance of MPAs and the funding exists. So the challenge is about challenging it effectively to conservation. And with that, we're happy to send it back over to Angus.
Thank you very much, Rona and Noah, and really interesting studies there. And I think, bringing out some critical, information, which I'm sure, we'll have an opportunity to discuss more of. We now have our next speaker. We have Mr. Tahalo Kami. He's an innovator and experienced consultant with a demonstrated history of working in green development and growth, natural resource management, internet for development, and strategic planning for organizations and governments. Tahalo, great to see you again. And, it'd be great if you could, just give us a sense of, the needs of the Pacific and any reflections you have on what you've just heard. But just an overview from you of the needs of the Pacific and so how you see things moving forward.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me, Angus? Is that clear?
Yes, we can hear you. You're loud and clear. Okay,
fantastic. Great to see you, Angus, and thank you for the presentation. Pretty clear, and I think what we need to do. I'm also being followed by two great speakers from the Pacific who are actually dealing with some books, and then I hope it's to some of the thinking, because I think we're in a space right now where the ambition should be matching the opportunity. And but here in the Pacific, just again on the scale issue with SIDS, we've got something like 34 million square kilometers of ocean in the EEZs of the developing Pacific island states. And this is shared by some 11 million people. So we're talking about spaces bigger than the continent of Africa. In fact, you could completely sink the continent of Africa in this space, but with only 11 million people compared to 1.3 billion people in Africa. We often say with conservation that you need spaces like this to stay healthy for this planet to exist and to exist in a healthy state, which is why when we start to talk 30-30 and protection and conservation, you'll find our Pacific leaders have always stood up, have a history of stepping up with these massive conservation commitments in the past. The question with the recent leaders meeting is, for the first time, we're starting to see a pullback on the big conservation commitments and the pay. And how do we ensure this balance between production and protection? And then even with the protection side, that if there's value to the planet and value to our people, should there be a means of reflecting these values economically? And then I want to just take us into bigger questions with 3030. The two questions here is, how do we ensure that this reflects, that the 3030 commitment reflects our values as people who've lived in this part of the world for thousands of years and have lived with the ocean? And then the other side of it is, then how do we build truly sustainable ocean economies? And, Angus, for someone like Angus, who's been in the ocean state discussion for a while, that how do we achieve real sustainable ocean statehood, which is what we really, I think if we were to say, what's the 2050 outcome here, is that the reality of being viable ocean states with, let's say, at least 50% of our economy coming directly from ocean engagements. And what is the meaning of this whole thing about the blue economy? So it's, when I say about this space, is that we're seeing a big interest in funding in terms of the ocean space. At the same time, the geopolitics, if there's a win-win for everyone, I think the obvious one is starting to say, how do we invest in this ocean economy space, or the sustainable ocean economy space, and the opportunity to talk about funding at a scale to do the kind of things that we might not have been able to do 5 years ago. And so I want to just leave 3 different thoughts in terms of moving forward, just in relation to some of the discussions we've had. And one of them is beyond policy to commitment. And one of our governments here, and I won't say which one, released their budget recently, and less than 1% is invested in oceans and environment, in spite of the massive narratives that come from the same government. I was talking about this in New York last week, and another hand went up from another of our governments and goes, that sounds like my government too. In other words, we're not going to see the kind of commitments in capacity, the kind of commitments that sustain the long-term development of our ocean-based economies if we don't start to see a shift in budgetary commitments, and that it doesn't become dependent on overseas projects and aid. And so most of us have gone through 40 or 50 years of some kind of independence, economic independence, but we haven't moved, because it's a vibrant part of our economy. We're putting 15% of our budget into. And so we're starting to recognize what this should look like. I think this is where policy needs to shift into the kind of commitments that will reflect the delivery of these policies. And I've often wondered in the last 6 months that since our Pacific leaders are meeting Biden in a few days, that if we had come up for a debt for ocean investment, putting SWAP into a better perspective, that we may have been able to talk about for a commitment for putting $1 to $2 billion down to pay off a significant part of the debt of 10 to 12 Pacific Island countries. And one prime minister texted me and said, what would this mean for us? And I said, this would mean in exchange for a shift to 7 to 10% of a commitment of 7 to 10% of your annual budget into ocean management. And it's not dollar for dollar, but it's simply enabling governments not to spend more on the investment in ocean economies than paying debt. And the thing about this is 10 or 15 years of that, it becomes a norm, just like health and just like education, it becomes a norm. It becomes essential to ensure that we continue to invest in our sector, that we all know that's important. So this whole thing, number one, beyond policy, the commitment and could look like and how to get that commitment over the line. The second one is rethinking finance of MPAs. And I think you'll be hearing some interesting presentations on value per square kilometer from New Air. But, you know, we've been talking, the other side of it that we've been talking for a while is MPA donuts. And if you take a picture, for example, of French Polynesia's 5 million square kilometers of EEZ, and then you look at the busyness outside, immediately outside the EEZ, which is the same picture around many of our and many of our EEZs, there's a lot of fishing out there benefiting from the management, the good management by those who are doing well. And it's free access to that fishing. And you start to say, can we be more creative by saying, let's open up the first 10 kilometers and then ensure compliance, licensing compliance for those who get the first benefits. You turn that into local fishing, that even the internal MPAs within your 30-30, that it's a privilege to be fishing on the fringes, maybe the kilometer around it, and starting to say, how do we make this a reality? And the rethinking of this and starting to get financing, ensuring that those who get first benefits or benefit the first opportunity to the benefit of management, license to pay a little bit more, and starting to say, what does that look like? And so rethinking how we get how we charge around MPAs, I think, is important. A lot of discussion has been going around this, but starting to look at scale, especially when we know that it is pretty busy in terms of those who want to access the fishery. And the final thing here is blue economies and the engagement of private sector. You know, I've often said here in the Pacific is, how do we become the biggest supplier of sustainable tropical seafood in the planet by 2050? And the reason for this is that we can't do it at any scale with the kind of investments we're getting now. We can't also do this on aid kind of budgeting. But when you start to look at the kind of investments that would make partnerships happen, innovative partnerships happen with those who are already doing some of this work in possibly developed country markets or other markets that look like ours. When you look at the reach of technology, when you look at things like, you know, maybe we have to look at impact financing at a scale that applies to, that enables community farming across, say, a country like Fiji. And that by the time we finish this, that Fiji has a significant coastal fisheries market. And so these are things where we have to start to look at, yeah, how do we make private sector partnerships real? And I'll throw in as an example here is, you know, the biggest other single fishery, I think, across our spaces is beach demur, sea cucumber. And we haven't harnessed it yet. And it's a market worth possibly $15 billion a year at this time and growing. And most of that right now is aquaculture market or mariculture, whichever way you want to put it. The question starts to become, what's the value of wild beach demur or beach demur that comes from our communities? It's been a boom and bust approach by our governments for years. It's almost like we haven't taken the time to pause and think about how do we secure and treat these high value markets, fishery that have markets that exist. And maybe it's time now to start to think about the kind of partnerships that could make this work. And beach demur is only the tip of the iceberg. But much of our time has been focused on tuna in the Pacific, much of our fisheries capacity. I'd say 60 to 70% of our fisheries capacity has been focused on tuna. And even though climate change is saying tuna is shifting out of our EEZs, we still haven't asked the question that went with 34 million square kilometers of EEZ. What's next? What's next in terms of this these massive spaces that we manage? And where 30-30 could possibly be a catalyst. And this kind of discussion to fixing what an ocean economy should look like. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Taholo, thank you very much for that. And, you know, you've given us a lot of food for thought. from what governments need to be doing in terms of their budgetary commitments, the whole idea of, the MPA donut, as you call it, but thinking a little bit more creatively, perhaps a little bit more broadly about how we sort of utilize this, this entire space, and think beyond fisheries to some of the examples that you gave. Thank you very much for that. I just want to, before introducing our next speakers, I'd just like to recognize the fact that, and Noah touched on it, we have so many people joining from, from far and wide. I see, just in the US alone, folks from San Diego, San Francisco, LA, Colorado, Florida, Las Vegas, and Hawaii. In the Pacific, we're seeing folks from Tonga, PNG, Niue, Marianas Islands, Niue, did I say, Australia. And we're also seeing folks from Indonesia and Brazil, St. Lucia, Trinidad, Barbados, and Seychelles, US Virgin Islands, and many others. And I'm sorry if we didn't capture everyone there. I'm sure there are many more. But it's really instructive, I think, to look at the Pacific, because there's so many innovations that have come out of the Pacific. They're really, along with many other SIDS, very important stewards for the overall ocean economy. And when we reflect back to, Rio +20, we know that the Pacific put quite a lot of effort into getting the whole idea of the blue economy to catch on. Then it didn't take root in the text, but certainly I think what we saw coming out, thereafter. And so well done, Pacific. And I know a huge amount of support from other islands and many other countries around the world. We now have William Cosca, and we have Coral Pasisi joining us. And then we have a few questions, and then we'd like to sort of open up for questions from the floor. We see some comments already coming in on the chat. Thank you very much for those. So let me start by introducing William Cosca. He has served as the executive director of the Micronesia Conservation Trust since 2006. He previously served as the founding executive director of the Conservation Society of Pohnpei, building the organization from the ground in 1998 into one of the leading conservation NGOs in Micronesia. Notably, he was named a fellow at Pew Foundation for Ocean Science in 2005, and has been active in the development and promotion of the Micronesia Challenge. William, great to have you here, and we look forward to hearing your reflections. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Angus, and thank you to all the organizers and all those who are attending our session today. Kasilele from Pohnpei, in the Federated States of Micronesia. And thank you for allowing me to come and tell our Micronesia sustainable finance story. We have several moving parts of our sustainable finance work, and they're all complementary to each other. We are very fortunate that we had the vision of our leaders who were able to pull together to launch the Micronesia Challenge initiative in 2006. A vision, a unique vision that was able to excite our local communities, at the national and jurisdictional level, but also was able to excite international and regional partners to support us. And the initiative was to protect 30% of our nearshore marine resources and 20% of our terrestrial resources. And so that vision, allowed us to go out there and basically find support for the work that our leaders had launched. And again, in just 2019, the leaders came together and saw the progress that we've made and agreed to expand the goals of the Micronesia Challenge to effectively managing 50% of our marine resources and 30% of our terrestrial resources by 2030. And they added, fisheries management, climate change adaptation, invasive species management, and sustainable development to the whole initiative. So it expanded the goals there. And this vision has driven how we been able to sustainably finance the work. And it also has leveraged, several similar initiatives across the globe, including the Caribbean Challenge, the Coral Triangle Initiative, the Hawaii Green Road, and others. And so those initiatives now have become a family under the Global Island Partnership that continues to support and that continues to promote such initiatives as the Micronesia Challenge. And that commitment from our leaders continues to be there. We have our leaders champion this initiative and in the highest levels in government. And that leadership commitment and the Micronesia Challenge has actually survived 20 administrative changes across the 5 jurisdictions that are involved. And we're very fortunate that when the leaders launched, we had the Nature Conservancy and Conservation International, and of course the Global Environment Facility, UNEP, supported with some initial commitments to go into an endowment that would then become a key to our sustainable finance mechanism for the Micronesia Challenge. And then, of course, other donors came in who couldn't put money into an endowment, but continue to support our work over the years. And so, we continue to have our leaders champion the Micronesia Challenge, which has made it very possible for us to continue to do the work. And in fact, some of the governments continue to provide regular annual funding to the endowment, as well as to many of the activities that are going on. They also created a regional office and a regional steering committee comprised of regional coordinator and jurisdictional focal points to oversee the day-to-day operations of the Micronesia Challenge. And that's a key organization that helps to keep everything together, helps to report to our leaders on the progress of the work that we're doing. We're also very fortunate that we've been able to create a regional support team of a lot of technical and financial institutions who are interested in supporting work in Micronesia, who sit on the regional support team and provide the kinds of technical assistance and some financial assistance that we need. And then, of course, we created a sustainable finance plan for the Micronesia Challenge that really looks at current government and non-government allocations to Micronesia Challenge and protected areas activities and the regular grants that are coming in. And from that sustainable finance plan, we were able to identify the cap. And that cap was the way that we were able to, calculate what was missing and what was needed to be raised in order for us to meet the needs of the protected area activities across the region. And of course, there was a goal that was set around $55 million to raise an endowment. There's still also some work to establish national protected area network funds, which are also part of this sustainable finance plan. So it's not just looking at endowments, but also looking at government input, non-government input, and other input from those who are part of the Micronesia Challenge initiative. And that sustainable finance plan, because the leaders expanded the goals of the Micronesia Challenge, we are now revising that sustainable finance plan to reflect the current situation now with the expanded Micronesia Challenge goals. And that plan should be coming out soon. We also have a number of finance vehicles, and those, again, those are governments who continue to support conservation work from their own budgets. There are the civil society organizations that are working in Micronesia. And then, of course, there's the Micronesia Conservation Trust, which the organization that I work for. And we have built a strong track record in terms of providing conservation grants to our local implementing organizations. And in fact, the MCT has been able to secure grants from all over the world, including US private foundations, US federal agencies, multilateral donor agencies, and individual government donor groups. And so far, with our accreditation to the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund, we've been able to support the communities and the countries. And we estimate that since we launched the Micronesia Challenge in 2006, we've been able to bring in over $30 million in grants that are currently being regranted. And then we've built an endowment of up to $30 million. So we have not reached our goal of $55 million, but we continue to work with our governments and our donor partners to continue to try and reach those. And of course, in order for us to be able to measure the work that we're doing, we've created our monitoring evaluations, both biophysical and socioeconomic monitoring, to gauge our success and to also allow us to do adaptive management. And that's being supported by groups like the University of Guam, the Palau International Coral Reef Center, the Nature Conservancy, and many others who are helping us with these. So, we are able to learn about the activities that we are doing and how they're having an impact on the communities that we are serving. And of course, if you have sustainable financing and if you have a lot of money, but you don't have the capacity on the ground for organizations and communities to absorb the financing, then your sustainable financing is not going to work. And so we have been building capacity of our local partners through the peer learning networks that are supporting work in Micronesia. And those peer learning networks, which includes the Micronesians in Island Conservation, Pacific Islands Managed and Protected Area Community, and the locally managed marine areas network, have really supported the work and in a lot of ways avoided a lot of the costs that you would require in paying a lot of money to consultants, because the people who are in these peer learning networks are able to support each other without demanding fees for their services. So it's been one of the key areas that has made this sustainable financing story in Micronesia possible. And then, of course, we are investing a lot in our future conservation leaders. We have the Micronesia Challenge Champions internship program, where we're focused on college level students to be involved in Micronesia Challenge work, receiving small stipends for being part of the internship. We have a scholarship program called the Bill Rayner Micronesia Challenge Scholarship, and an organization from Japan, Association for the Promotion of International Cooperation, who are providing full scholarships to students to attend schools around the Pacific Rim to get either their master's or their PhDs, and we're proud to say that we have almost 100% retainage of our students who have gone on and they've returned home to be leaders in their own organizations after they graduate. And of course, we also have a fellowship program for students who can't find a job right away, that we bring them back with the fellowship so that they can, we don't lose them, and they can come home for a year or two under this fellowship before they're picked up by other organizations. So with our sustainable finance story is about a number of things that are working, complementary to each other, because sustainable financing can't happen without all these areas that are in place. Of course, I'm talking about Micronesia. So, but I think it also reflects what others also are experiencing. So I will stop there, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
That's fantastic, William. And it's, first of all, congratulations on the great work of MCT. It's really great to hear, how your organization has been really able to go from strength to strength, as you head towards that, that 55 million target. And but also, I think, one of the very good points that you've made is sustainable finance. Yes, hugely important, but also the capacity to implement is also crucial. So really like this idea of the peer learning networks, and perhaps that's something we can come back to. Well, our next speaker is Coral Pasisi. Coral, great to see you again. You've been quite a warrior, I know, from our days at AOSIS, in the trenches on climate change. And for everyone else, Carl's an earth scientist and development planner with over 20 years of experience in the Pacific Island regions, focusing on sustainable development, climate change, and associated financing. She has worked at the government level in Niue as a sustainable development planner, and at the regional level for Pacific Island Forum Secretariat as a regional and international issues advisor, and also for the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environmental Program, also known to many of us as SPRED. So Coral, great to see you, and we'd love to hear from you and your points on this topic. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Friday. It's wonderful to see you again, and our participants, and thank you to our hosts for inviting us here today. I'm just going to share my screen, if that's okay. Not that one. If you could just let me know when that's coming through. And I will try and move it around so I can actually start the slideshow. Is that working?
No? Maybe if you scroll down to the presentation mode button. No. On the should be somewhere there. No,
it should be down here somewhere. Hang on a second. Yeah. Sorry, let me just jump out of.
Also go to the top left. And next to the comment icon, you should see the slideshow. So you have auto save, off, save. Yeah, that one.
This one?
Yes.
Right. Perfect. Thank you very much, team effort. Excellent. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm going to dive straight in, if that's okay, because I know you've got limited time. And I'm going to switch off my own video, if that's okay. Just because to save on bandwidth. Can you still hear me? All right.
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's a great privilege for me to address the team today and really share the case study of Niue and the Niue ocean-wide effort. So I'm here as the president of Tofia Niue, which is the local nonprofit that is in partnership with the government and a range of stakeholders supporting Niue's vision in this space. The Niue ocean-wide effort really started as Niue's first ever public-private partnership through a NOW project supported by Oceans 5 funding, and has really evolved over the last 7 years to being close to transitioning to Niue's first ever public-private trust, the Niue and Ocean-wide Trust. And so I'm really happy to present a snapshot of this trust, its key objectives, and the unique capitalization strategy that Niue has developed and is a world first around the ocean conservation credits. So essentially, Niue's vision has been in line with its national development plan, to build a resilient, conservation-focused blue economy that can contribute to long-term ocean protection, climate resilience, and sustainable development for Niue. And this has largely been done through these three principal critical pathways. One, the development of an EEZ-wide comprehensive marine spatial management plan and a large-scale marine protected area within that. Secondly, a compliance strategy and the capability to implement that effectively. And thirdly, to leverage new and additional benefits of the blue ocean space because of that, and to develop a sustainable financing to make sure that these efforts can continue into the future. So just to give you an idea of where Niue is and some of the major milestones that have happened over the last 7 years, and I won't cover all of them. I just want to pick out two that I think are globally outstanding. The first is that Niue has 100% of its EEZ under legal protection via the establishment of its Marine Spatial Management Plan, Niue Nukutulua Multiple Purpose Marine Park. And secondly, Moana Mahu, which is 40% of its EEZ under a large-scale marine protected area that is no-take, and this is second largest MPA, no-take MPA in the world as a percentage of EEZ. I think that's second to Palau. Now, I want to come back to this point, which highlights some of the points that you raised at the beginning very eloquently, Dr. Friday, around the true value of the ocean assets that we have, especially when they're under conservation. So Niue's Moana Mahu has several dimensions of value that account for the holistic value of this natural blue asset, particularly under strict conservation. All of these dimensions can be linked to contributing to global, regional, and country level targets, agreements, and benefits, including the Biodiversity Convention, the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement, the SDGs, Niue's sustainable development policies, and sustainable tourism policies as well. So we all share in the benefits of this ocean asset. And as such, we should really share in the cost of its protection. So how do we create a mechanism to ensure that everyone can fairly contribute to that protection? Those who benefit from it, those who are polluting it, and certainly for the generations to come. And this really is essentially the basis for the establishment of Niue's sustainable financing mechanism to support this in perpetuity. So at its heart is Niue's first ever public-private conservation trust, the Niue and Ocean-wide Trust, and a $32 million capitalization target for the NOW Trust endowment, which is envisaged to produce 1.5 million annually in investment returns. So this would go to supporting a wide range of compliance, climate action, blue economy, and sustainable development initiatives, certainly for the next 20 years and hopefully in perpetuity. It will also support a critical risk finance fund to de-risk investments in the blue economy and provide an important line of finance in times of growing climate disasters. There are a range of capitalization options for the trust, including direct contributions, levies, innovative merchandise in the range that was discussed prior. But our key new innovative one is what we're calling the Ocean Conservation Credit. And in the development of this whole mechanism, we've considered a range of potential funding sources in line with their policies of interest as they align to the values of ocean conservation, sustainable development, and resilience, which are all part of what the Now Trust is seeking to achieve. So our hope is that the major share of funding will come from this new innovation called the Ocean Conservation Credits. So what is an Ocean Conservation Credit? Essentially, an Ocean Conservation Credit is a credit that enables buyers to become direct stakeholders and contributors to Niue's ocean protection, climate resilience, and sustainable development in a way that is both sustainable and transparent. Essentially, an OCC is costed on the required costs of protection and outcomes arising across 1 square kilometre of ocean per year in the Moana Mahu area. So this essentially is calculated for Niue at $12.50 per annum per square kilometre. As ocean protection's true value is in the length of time it is protected for, Niue has proposed this period to be 20 years. So forward sold as an increment of 20 years, this equates to $250 per ocean conservation credit. And as we have 127,000 square kilometres and OCCs to sell across the breadth of the Moana Mahu area, this would help to mobilise the required $32 million target for the endowment. The trust, the operational trust that will deliver this is very robust. It is going to be launched towards the end of this year, potentially at the CBD COP by our head of government, but it is established under New Zealand law, under the New Zealand Charitable Trust, and it has a balanced number of trustees from the NGO, government, private sector, and village councils. I won't go into the details of how this works. I think that's reasonably straightforward. But critically, I want to highlight the theory of change or the paradigm shift that this would bring for Niue and small island developing states. This would enable Niue to move from project-based, donor-dependent, sporadic implementation to holistic, self-sustaining and country-driven ocean conservation and resilience and sustainable development. And that is a key game changer if we want this kind of initiative to be sustainable into the future. So what would people get in return, or investors get in return, from buying OCCs or directly contributing to the trust? And here we have, there will be several impact stories associated with the investments that come from the trust, an annual report that ensures that all resources are accounted for, and the Moana Mahu monitoring, reporting and verification matrix. And this goes back to the original dimensions of value that I mentioned before. Every dimension has matrices under that can be measured, and some can't be measured easily. But in the words of Rona at the beginning, all of these elements are part of the value of that asset. And so whether they can be measured easily now or not, we need to include that as part of the value of this ocean asset. And that's essentially the presentation, trying to keep within your 7 minutes. But just to note that, you know, the key next steps for us are really to explore the early anchor investments as this goes to market, and to really build awareness of this as a potential mechanism, including for other small island states who are exploring the need to mobilize resources in a fair and balanced way across the ocean space. Thank you, Dr. Friday.
Coral, thank you very much for that. I think very inspiring, and I'm sure you know, lots of people are going to be looking at the sort of ocean conservation credit, that mechanism, you know, as an interesting innovation going forward. Very much like the way that it's sort of priced, you know, down to the sort of square kilometer, and then of course you multiply that by 20, bring it up to $250. I was wondering whether you would, you know, and perhaps in the Q&A we could pick this up, but I was wondering whether sort of crowdfunding would play a role in that, in terms of how you sort of go about selling the ocean conservation credits, but we could sort of come back to that. I think, look, we've had some great presentations here, so thank you to all of the presenters. And I know we have a couple of questions already sort of queuing up actually 3 questions now coming up in the Q&A for our presenters. You might want to go to the Q&A and start looking at those. But I'd like to just sort of get some of the the questions sort of going with starting with Willie and following on with Holo. One of the things you were talking about, William, around was the fact that you were seeing sort of governments making contributions to the Micronesia challenge, and as one of the ways of raising funds. And it was interesting that what Tahalo was saying is that we're not seeing enough in terms of government budget, government set-asides, as a line item, in budgets, as a major line item in budgets, national budgets, and perhaps we should be seeing more of that, given the importance of the oceans to the Pacific economies and economies of all islanders. But let's park that for now, and we can sort of pick that up, in the discussion. I was just wondering, what key things do you think have made the Micronesia Conservation Trust, successful from the sort of regional financing perspective? And, what are some of the key learnings that you would like to share, for the Pacific?
Thank you, Ankus. The Micronesia Conservation Trust story is that we began with a $50,000 grant to launch the organization, and because we began small, we learned to be able to really be careful with our resources. And I think that the main thing that we want to share here is that we build a really good track record in terms of being able to provide grants, monitor those grants, and then build the capacity of our local organizations so that they can actually absorb the grants and do a good job with them. And that's been the best fundraising for us, is that the donors continue to want to give us funding because we deliver on the work that we propose to them. And to us, that's been a key. And then, of course, we've received really good support from our government. Almost all the proposals that we send in have been supported by our government partners and our local communities.
Now, thank you for that. So you're getting government support. You've got the track record in terms of implementation, and then from an implementation perspective, you have that capacity to sort of absorb money, get things implemented, and then be a good track record in being able to implement. Tahalo, you've engaged on a variety of issues throughout the Pacific. What do you think are the risks if we don't take action? So, and I want to split this up into two. What are the risks if we don't take action? What are the risks if we don't see more, governments putting aside a larger set aside, as you put it, for budgetary set aside for oceans? What are your thoughts on that? What do you think are the risks if we don't take action? What should governments be doing about it?
Yeah, thank you. And again, thank you for the inspiring presentations, everyone. But, the risk is that without governments committing and whatever mechanisms we create, there has to be a hook that brings government and political leadership into that for it to stay. And it's simply because these are spaces managed by political governments. And the commitment is reflected ultimately in the budget, and not the rhetoric and the narratives that we get in many places from our leaders. And I think the awareness after the pandemic was just seeing who was brought to the table when we talked about recovery. And what was missing us focus on our biggest asset of them all, next to our people, is the ocean, and then the kind of investments that would make that a reality. And so if governments don't rethink it, I think we're stuck with a colonial leftover that there are certain ways to do a budget without looking at what is the investment side of the budget, and not just the maintenance and management of yesterday plus or minus 5%. That we've got to start to see that the ocean economy is as much a part of that discussion, and governments need to do it. Otherwise, the danger is that we are constantly having these discussions where projects fill a space, but they don't sustain them. And so I think somewhere between private sector, as innovative private sector, and increased budgetary commitment, that we start to see some of the magic of the ocean economies that we talk about. Thank you.
And you were also saying, look, we have climate change, there are predictions that, tuna migratory pathways, may move, it's going to be impacting us. There are other things impacting, biodiversity and biomass. So, do you have sort of confidence that we're on the right track to address the sort of, downward trends that we're seeing?
Confidence with it. I think confidence that the awareness is there. I think the shift, it's like turning a mega ship around for our economies, is to start to see beyond tuna.
Right.
And like I said, as much of our fisheries investment has been tuna, our capacity is tuna, our expertise at the highest level is tuna. Our politicians are attracted by the tuna discussion. And so it's the shift to start to say, in this what other high value engagements and opportunities are there, and how do we make that happen?
All right, and I know one of the questions, sort of coming in is, how can we, well, they asked about it globally, how can we have a sort of global campaign on value of, a blue economy? But it seems from what you're saying, Tahalo, we probably, amongst SIDS, we probably need more of a campaign so that, governments, private sector, and other entities can really begin to look beyond, the sort of key traditional industries and start thinking a little bit, outside the box. I'm mindful of the time because we're coming up to 20 past, and we'd really like to hear a few things from Coral, Noah, and Rona. So, Coral, in terms of the ocean conservation credits, would you see a role for, for the World Bank or for the Green Climate Fund or for the GEF or, some of these other players to come in and take on something wholesale perhaps and then retail it out? Or are you thinking about sort of, going more to, to the public, to individuals through a crowdsourcing, mechanism? What are your thoughts, on that?
No, thank you, Dr. Friday. That's a good question. So we've canvassed this from all angles, really, so that this can be open to anyone who wants to contribute to and sees value in this ocean asset, not just for what it does for Niue, but because as the global environment is deteriorating in its health, the value of these protected ocean spaces are increasing as a value commodity, and people see that value and they want to invest in that, and so hopefully do other organizations, corporates, and multilaterals. And so really, we think that the OCC is affordable enough for individuals, and certainly every time that we've presented this and socialized it, we have a lot of individuals who come up and say, I'd like to contribute to this, I'd like to buy some OCC so I know that I'm handing something over to my grandchildren, right? This many square kilometers under protection, under solid protection for a long period of time. There's big corporations that promise that they want to support large areas of ocean protection. This is available for them to purchase as well, as long as there's no greenwashing involved. And finally, from a climate finance perspective, the ocean's ability to generate what our people have depended on for thousands of years is deteriorating because of the pollution of carbon. And so that stream of finance into the purchasing of an ocean conservation credit should be facilitated, whether it's by the World Bank, ADB, or other entities that can access these funds. I think it's a fair and just way, because essentially all of our SIDS have been locked out of the carbon markets because we can't meet all the criteria of that mechanism. It's been so difficult for our countries to get to that. So we're creating a credit that we can deliver on. We have outlined the values of that, and if people see that and appreciate that value, they will invest in them. We don't have to meet at this point a stringent set of criteria that's well and truly outside of our capability. And hopefully in time, as that goes forward, maybe we develop we take some of the indicators in that ocean conservation credit right now and standardize that. So then you actually can trade or into the future an ocean conservation credit. So for some countries who will always be dependent on sustainable fisheries, maybe they would like to purchase some ocean conservation credits, so they're still contributing to ocean conservation in our blue continent, but they are pursuing in a sustainable way what they can access in the blue economy space. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Carl. We've got about 7 minutes, so we do a bit of a rapid fire round where we're going to ask everyone, what's the one big takeaway you'd like to leave? And I'd like to encourage you in answering that to, look at the questions from Lesinia, from Rubinia, from Jacqueline Evans, Manrico Masadka, from John Griffith, the U.S. State Department, from Jean Everett, Ron L., Brendan Pasisi, and Tita Kara and Adam Brown. And so if you could sort of weave anything, into that answer. So, for example, one of the questions is, learning more about the intersection of marine spatial planning and blue finance, and how MSP can actually sort of support that. And wanted to sort of bring in Rona and Noah here to, just sort of reflect on some of the big takeaways, but perhaps, think about, ways in which, organizations, perhaps like USAID, the multilateral development banks, what can they be doing more? I have some thoughts on that, but I'm just mindful of the time. So, Rona and Noah, I'd like to hand it over to you. Just give us a quick sort of 1 minute summary of, what's the one big thing, and any reflections you have on some of the questions that are showing up in Q&A.
Okay, I'll jump in first. I see the first question about costs. And honestly, we don't have good data on that. It's sort of site by site, and I think there's a lot more work to be done there on working out how much MPA functioning actually does cost to do properly. That said, one of my big takeaways is that I think I would like to see us sort of change the narrative around MPA costs and think of them more as an investment. And really with these benefits that we can't value and we shouldn't try to, but that they are part of a broader seascape management. And as Noah said, we don't talk about how much it costs to do fisheries policy. We don't talk about how much it costs to do enforcement on certain things. And so that's where we really need to get with MPA finance, part of this larger seascape management, and that these additional costs might actually not be that additional to start with, and that they are a government investment, but that governments can augment finance for these investments through some of the other untapped industries that currently are getting away scot-free and should pay. So I think that's my takeaway. And I'll throw it over to Noah.
Thanks for that. Noah?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what we've heard today. Very grateful for all the presentations. And yeah, I think the money is there. I think that's the fundamental message that I want to get across, is that the money is there. There's a lot of users, a lot of beneficiaries, a lot of polluters. And again, I think that the key is how to channel those funds from those industries, the very, very valuable ocean-based economy, to what should be part of an integrated approach to management, which includes conservation. That to me is kind of the critical question. And how do we get away from this sort of piecemeal, item by item quantification and move really with bolder steps to mechanisms that can reallocate some of this funding? And I think, and I saw some questions about this, political will. You can model the financing, you can model the biological aspects. The one thing you can't model is the political process. And really, to do this at scale, that's what's needed. So I guess it's a question for everyone here is, what can we do as a group to facilitate the political will needed to develop some more ambitious mechanisms that can really allocate funding from the ocean-based economy to conservation. And
so the money is there. We need more political will on some of these things. Tahalo and Willie, you've got 30 seconds each, and my apologies for giving you such a short time frame. And Coral, 30 seconds as well. So Tahalo, if I can start with you, then William, and then I'd like to give Coral the last word. Tahalo? William, you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you, Angus. I just, in response to the blue economy and marine spatial planning, as you are well aware, Angus, because you, the Waitt Institute and Foundation are supporting the Blue Prosperity Micronesia work that's going on right now in the Federated States of Micronesia. And so, of course, we are using the marine spatial planning work to support the blue economy work that we are doing in Micronesia. And so there's a real link between those two there. But yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Coral, last words.
Thank you. Buy some OCCs, please, because there is no point in small island states developing these mechanisms to the commensurate absorptive capacity of their countries and no one actually investing in them. Everyone who's heard the OCC pitch wants to replicate this somewhere else, but we haven't yet got the investors to proof of concept to invest in this. So instead of getting countries to continuously try to get funding out of these overly complex multilateral systems, put the money into countries' own systems that they develop, like this, like the Micronesian Conservation Trust. Why are they not at 55 million already in their endowment? They have a proven track record. They do great work. They shouldn't have to go out there. Donors should be fighting over putting the money into the trust already.
Thank you, Coral. I think we've lost Tahalo, but we have the organizer, Stacey Alvarez de la Campa from Island Innovation to presumably invite us to wrap up.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for taking the time to be here. I want to say a huge thank you to our moderator, Dr. Angus Friday, who's the director at the Blue Economy of the Waitt Institute, also one of our sponsors. Thanks so much to Noah, the director of Sterling Resources, Rona. We really enjoyed all of your presentations. Rona is an environmental economist and an independent consultant. Thanks very much to William, the executive director of the Micronesia Conservation Trust. And of course to Tahalo, he's the CEO of Kami Pacific Solutions. And Coral, of course, last but by no means least. I know looking at the comments in the chat, everyone really enjoyed your presentations and we really appreciate your presence here. Coral is the senior advisor to the Director General SPC of the Pacific Community. So tomorrow, everyone, tomorrow we begin bright and early at 5 a.m. that's 5 a.m. in the New York time, and then 10 a.m. UK time, we have a session entitled Action and Adaptation in the African Islands, Rising to Meet the Challenge of Climate Change. So, thanks everyone for attending day 1 of the Virtual Island Summit 2022. That's what we kick off with day 2 tomorrow. We'd love to, hear from you as a community. Please keep in touch. You can follow us on Instagram, which is @_islandsinnovation. And, please, we would really appreciate any of your feedback. So with that, without further ado, thanks so much to everyone. I wish you all a fantastic evening. And again, thank you. Good night.
Thank you and good night.
Thank
Good
Thank
morning.
you. Good